do you believe you sell the best coffee in Australia?
She's like, well, Australians love coffee, so why don't you do coffee? I'm like, yeah, I don't know. It's super like competitive and there's a lot of specialty coffee places. Spending time in Colombia, I was introduced to coffee farms and coffee culture for many years now. I think there needs to be a newfound appreciation on how difficult it is to get such a high-grade cup of coffee. They worked so much harder than me. The next day, I got on a plane and went back to Colombia, went straight to the farm. I said, let's do this. I believe that when you hear the word Colombian coffee in Australia, you will think Willy's Beans. I believe that when you think about specialty coffee on the Gold Coast, you will think Willy's Beans.
On this episode of the God-Given Talent podcast, I sit down with Jayson Matthew of Willy's Beans to talk all things coffee, sharing his passion and bringing awareness to what specialty coffee truly is at a sustainable level. In a sense, he's redefining how we appreciate our favorite morning beverage, which couldn't be contained in this YouTube version. So for the extended audio-only conversation, go check it out on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts, linked below. Now, enjoy this interview with Jayson. Cheers.
Cheers.
So when growing up, did you ever imagine you'd be here, which is running a business and going to Colombia 3-4 times a year?
Not at all. To be honest with you, if I told you about the type of childhood I had or the type of teenager I was, you would look at me now and you'd be like, no way. Like, I was a lot more soft-spoken. I always knew that, like, for example, I played golf. I enjoyed performing arts. I enjoyed, cultural things, but I was never really as passionate and forthcoming as what I am now. But I grew into that through traveling and putting myself in uncomfortable positions and pushing myself to grow. Like in my family, my father and my brother are like the big tough guys, and I was like the soft-hearted guy that had to step up to the plate in some way, shape or form.
So let's give a bit of context as to who you are with all that in mind. What's your God-given talent?
My God-given talent? I think my God-given talent is passion.
I like that answer.
Yeah.
And I noticed that right away when I first met you.
Yeah.
Expand on that though. Why is that?
I have to be honest, for the astrologists out there, I'm not that big into astrology, but I am a Leo. So maybe that fire of being a Leo, or maybe because I've spent so much time in the Latin American culture and they're very passionate people. It was really nice today. I had some Colombian clients come in and they even said, you can't fake passion.
Tell me about your connection to Colombia.
Yeah, so I've spoken a little bit about it in the past, being the Olympic physiotherapist for Colombia, working with Farran Cabal. Colombia kind of became a little bit of a second family, a second home. And it was multiple years in which I was going there and feeling that warmth, that presence. And honestly, even then I didn't think I'd be in coffee.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed coffee. I enjoyed going and tasting coffee around the world and going back to Colombia and seeing the culture around coffee, and I thought it was beautiful. But I never truly felt, okay, coffee's going to be this big part of my life until I had some things that were going on personally that I realized I didn't want to be this nomad around the world.
Yeah, well.
I'm going to speak very honest and...
Do it.
People are going to get to know me right now. I lived in Montreal as well on my weeks off from tour. So I was in Canada and I had a long-standing relationship for many years. So I knew if I was living in that life on tour and working with athletes, I was never going to be a good father or a good husband. And so it really got me to challenge myself and be like, well, I'm somebody who's always taken my identity from my work. So like working with athletes, I was the physio traveling and that was Jayson, when that's not Jayson, you know? And so I was like, you know, I need to make big changes. I need to decide whether I'm going to live in Canada or I'm going to move back to Australia. And so I remember I was FaceTiming my mum and I was in Montreal and it's like, Mum, you know, what can I do? And she's like, well, you've traveled the world and every place you go in the world, you talk about coffee. When you're in Colombia, you're always talking about coffee and like Australians love coffee. So why don't you do coffee? And I'm like, yeah, I don't know. It's super like competitive and, you know, there's a lot of specialty coffee places. And then from one day to the next, I just went down this rabbit hole. I started speaking to farmers. Like coffee is something that connects the world, you know, and that comes down to relationships. And for me, I don't think there's any better product to build relationships in and with and around than coffee. It was really even at the Australian Open there, I was like, man, I'm so mentally switched out of this place. This is not where I want to be. And then the next day I got on a plane back with the athletes, the Colombians, and went back to Colombia, went straight to the farm. I said, let's do this. And we were talking about all these different names. Like I was thinking like Vida Verde, which is like green life. Cafune was one of the names as well. And then
all words that I don't know how to pronounce.
Yeah. And then Robert Farah said, you should do Willy's Beans. And so really nobody knows that. That's an exclusive.
Hey.
Maybe one day I'm going to have to pay him a little bit more money because it's all thanks to him that the name Willy's Beans came around, and you know that leads into the story of the Jeep and everything like that.
Willy's Jeep is iconic to the Colombian people.
Yeah.
So give a bit more context to that.
Yeah, like I said, I want to build a company that's not Jayson's company, you know. Whether I'm here or not, I've always said this place is like a safe place for anybody who is passionate about coffee.
Yeah, great.
So Willy's Beans has to represent that. And what better way to tell that story than with the Jeep, which has stood the test of times. Like this Jeep, through political unrest and all of the stuff that you see on Netflix, is a sign of, you know, strength. And even to this day, like when I go back to Colombia, I still see people using the Willy's Jeeps out in Salento, Finlandia, and like the people who are listening to this who are Colombian, like they will feel that and they'll be like, yeah, it's true. It's such a strong farmer's vehicle. And at the end of the day, I want Willy's Beans to be a representation of the people who make coffee possible. And I want to create awareness and I want to advocate and I want to educate around that. And I find that the Willy's Jeep is going to help me do that. I don't want to devalue myself here, but what I do, I wake up every morning and even when I'm tired or I'm working late at night, I'm like, wow, the people who made this coffee possible, like they worked so much harder than me. You know, you go out onto that farm, don't do a little pretty single origin tour, do a proper farm experience and you hand pick and select. I was talking to a coffee professional today, like when they pick X amount of cherries, you times that by 30 to get one 35 kilogram bag of coffee. And that's someone working 8 hours a day and it's so minimal. And then you see people just like, you know, whatever. And it's like, so much meaning went into this, you know? So for me, that's why I feel that way.
So let's go down that rabbit hole. What is specialty coffee?
Specialty coffee. Before we get on to specialty coffee, I want to make a statement that people might be surprised I'm going to say. There is an avenue for commercial coffee, and there always needs to be commercial coffee. Commercial coffee isn't a bad thing. I think what is a bad thing is that in coffee, unlike other beverages, it's very murky waters when we talk about distinguishing what is commercial coffee, what is specialty coffee and educating the consumers on, all right, this might be specialty coffee, but behind that specialty coffee, like I did a podcast with the farmers, and we're going to release that soon. And he said, Jayson, we do specialty coffee, but in that specialty coffee, it's not just based on a point scale. Traditionally, you get 80 plus to 84. I would say it's a clean cup. Some people would argue that's the specialty like border. And then you get, 84 to 86, which I'm saying that's when you're starting to, be specialty. And then 86 to 88, they're like specialty plus, like amazing cups of coffee. And then 88 plus are your exotic, very much competition grade coffees that getting those kind of coffees is so difficult consistently. But it's getting a lot of better with education, processing methods at the farm level. So if you define coffee like that, that's one thing. And people can define coffee like that, and that's okay. But I want to take it a step further and go, okay, everybody wants to talk about sustainable coffee. Everyone wants to talk about sustainability in a specialty aspect. Well, then we should delve deeper into understanding what happens at the farm level. So, for example, on Manantiales, it's 40% preserved for natural rainforest. We're only able to, technically harvest 60% of the land, but they're only doing 25% of the land. Okay. And if you understand agricultural practices and you understand what is happening at those altitudes and everything like that, it makes sense that you're only going to harvest 25% because you want things to be sustainable. You want the soil to maintain those minerals and, regenerate so you can have harvest after harvest consistently really good coffees. But then the farmer says to me, but who cares, Jace? Because I did it the other day, a video where I said, I'm on the back of the ute at 1,600 meters above sea level, just chilling on the side of the cliffs. And I got a can of nitro and I'm like, who actually cares? Australia, do you care? I hear a lot of people care about their coffee. Because what I find in specialty, and someone challenged me on it today, a lot of people do care, Jayson. And I'm like, yeah, okay, that's fair enough. But the people who care, how many of them are being outspoken about it? Because I find right now the people who pretend to care are louder than the people who actually care. And so I don't need to be the loudest in the room. Actually, I don't want to be the loudest in the room, which will be a shock to most people. I just want things to be advocated for and educated in the right way. And so I think that specialty goes beyond numbers. I know that was a very long-winded answer, but I think there needs to be a newfound appreciation on how difficult it is to get such a high-grade cup of coffee and still do it in a sustainable, agricultural, friendly manner.
Yeah. I remember when I first met you, something you said to me was you want the coffee to taste how the farmer intended it.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that statement?
So right now there's a big move in coffee where they will inoculate coffees and they'll get a low-grade coffee with minimal defects and they'll put it with banana peels. And then they're selling it to you as a high-grade filter that tastes like banana. But that doesn't do a lot of farmers justice because it takes away from the farmers who are trying to produce really high-end coffees that are true to the variety.
Yeah.
So that variety wasn't intended to taste like bananas. You know what I mean?
Okay. Yeah.
But they're able to inoculate it and do these, experiments, which I think is detrimental to the producers who are purists, right? I know that blends can be amazing, But I always say we don't do blends because I want to showcase to people that, all right, Andres Londoño wanted this coffee and this variety to be amazing in its own right, like a Merlot. All right, Santiago Londoño, he's doing these amazing practices, taking the time, the effort, the care, the love, the appreciation. And now you have this red bourbon, which tastes like, you know, I was comparing that to wine. So this is like a Cab Sav or whatever. Yep. But they're so amazing in their own right. So why are we always trying to blend things together to just give the customer a chocolate nutty coffee and that's it? We're doing that because the market tells us that we want milk-based coffees. We want, you know, your cool iced lattes with 2 douses of caramel or vanilla or whatever else.
So everything but coffee taste.
And that's fine. Like, there's a market for that, and I get it. I 1,000% get it. We do iced lattes here, and we need that. But we also need people to showcase what the farmer wanted to showcase.
As you said before, it's the farmer who's done majority of the hard work before it even arrives to the country and gets roasted and goes to the consumer.
And listen, most farmers are too small to have a voice.
Yeah.
Most farmers don't have the education level to advocate for themselves. Most farmers will never meet somebody who is willing to take the risk on them and say, okay, I'm going to invest, or most farmers don't have the ability where somebody will say to them, okay, I'll give you the money before you harvest and then I'll receive the coffees 4 months later, because that's not great for cash flow, but that's what I do.
Wow.
So by the time you see the coffee here in the warehouse, I paid for it 4 months ago. But then if I go sell that coffee to another roaster, they're going to want, 30 days financing, like agreement to pay you back. And then, then most of the time they're late. So I'm not getting my money back on that coffee for a long time, but I don't care about that. And that's what I think some people don't realize. Like, I'm not in it for that. If that happens, amazing. But I'm in it to showcase to the coffee community that there needs to be more education to the consumers. I have this big vision. I have this big dream. I believe that when you hear the word Colombian coffee in Australia, you will think Willy's Beans. I believe that when you think about specialty coffee on the Gold Coast, you will think Willy's Beans. I believe that when you think about a company who's trying to highlight the story of the producer, you will think Willy's Beans. And I tell myself this every day. So whenever I do something, if it's not in line with that, please, I welcome it. Like, tell me, challenge me, let me know when I'm not living up to that. If ever you're passionate, sometimes that passion can overflow, and I don't want to step over the line. I want to push the boundary, but I never want to be disrespectful. I never want to destroy other people's businesses. I just want there to be more awareness. And a great example is when people on the Gold Coast are serving specialty coffee at specialty cafes, and I know where they buy their coffee from, as in the roasters. I know which importers they're buying their coffee from, as in where the roaster gets their coffee. And I know from a Colombian aspect where the importers are sourcing those coffees, whether it's one farm, regional, whatever that is. So I thought of this great idea that I would take the Willy's Jeep down to these areas. People would be walking with other cups of coffee, and I would say, hey, do you want a free cup of coffee? No, I'm busy, whatever. All right, I will. And I'd get a $20 or a $50 note out. I said, I bet you this is real specialty coffee. And that is not specialty coffee. And obviously it's so subjective, right?
Yes.
I will say that it's very subjective. But at the end of the day, I was willing to put my money where my mouth is. And so far, nobody's taken me up and taken the money. And I think the reason why they don't is because, yeah, it's a high quality cup of coffee, but more than anything, it gives me a chance to tell them the story.
Great.
So even if I pay them $20, guess what? Or $50, I don't care. The monetary value for me doesn't matter. The ability for me to engage with someone and for them to hear the story on what I believe matters with coffee, that's worth $50 to me. That's worth $20 to me. And I'm willing to take that risk.
I was starting a cafe and all these beans start approaching me. Use our beans. What should I look for?
Oh, this is a great question. And I'm really glad you asked it. I believe that if you are going to take something for free, it's never for free. So 99% of the bigger roasting companies will try and give you all the equipment, all the gear, and then in the end, you're locked into them in some way, shape or form, because it's either, even if they don't put you on a contract, it's then an inconvenience to get the machine out, and people have already started drinking the beans, and it's a way for them to somewhat trap you. And I'm not saying that that's a bad business model, because a lot of people do it.
So for those who don't know, they pay back the machine they got for free through the beans they buy.
Exactly. Everything comes down to financing, right? So they're putting that dollar value into the bean, or they're telling you, okay, it's going to be an extra $2 or whatever it is. So realistically, you're just financing equipment. I think if you're a business and you understand financing and you think a bit more laterally, you want to have control of your products. So anybody who buys coffee from Willy's Beans, they can drop me next week and I can't do anything about it. There's no legally binding contract. And that's leaving me somewhat vulnerable to the vultures, which is the other companies, because they'll go to my customers and they'll say, well, I'll give you this, I'll give you that, a cheaper bean, a better bean, whatever it is. But I believe in relationships. And I believe that if you're going to start a cafe, it doesn't have to be Willy's Beans. If a coffee company wants to give you a machine, cool, great. But don't make your decisions based off that. Make your decision based off, does this company align with me and my purpose and what I want to do with my cafe? Will this company support me through the good days and the bad days? Will this company be able to consistently give me a product that I want? Because right now, I have to step up to the plate every single time I give something to one of my wholesale partnerships, because otherwise they can turn around and say, this is shit, I'm not paying for it. Otherwise I'll leave you. You're locked into any contracts or anything like that. Even if the cup's shit, it's usually too much of a headache to change, or you're too scared to change, so you put up with it. I don't think people should put up with poor products or poor service. Listen, there is a lot of roasters who are trying to do good things, and not everyone has the access that I have to farmers and producers. That's one thing I will say. But I do think that the industry as a whole just needs to be better defined. Like there's certain people who are, like there's dudes in Melbourne who you'd never know who are doing absolutely amazing things in the specialty world. Same in Sydney, same in Adelaide. There's definitely places. But I want that community to grow. You know, people come in here who are, you know, big commercial companies, and they're like, yeah, but you're only 2% of the market, so who cares? It's a $10 billion monster. You're like, the clientele that you service is 2%. Who cares? My view is that 2% will one day be 5%, and that 5% will one day be 10%. And that 10%, I think in 15 years' time, will be 20%. Commercial will always be there. We need it. It's vital, even from a producing aspect. But I think the shift of power and the balance will hopefully change. And if I can be a leading company, brand, voice in that 2% that grows to 20%, I think we can have a big impact.
Do you believe you sell the best coffee in Australia?
I knew you were going to do this to me. It's It's very difficult for me to answer that question. My heart says this. We don't have the runs on the board to come out and say a statement like that. But in the next 12 to 18 months, we will. I believe that in the next 12 to 18 months, Willy's Beans will grow to a level that we can showcase that we do have the best coffee in Australia. But as outlandish as I can be, I'm not going to sit here and make that statement until I can back it up, and I'm willing to put myself out there and put it up against the biggest companies in Australia. But I need 12 to 18 months to be able to prove that.
Watch this space.
Watch this space. Cheers, mate.